Hello, my name is Megan Wiesman, and I am going to discuss the hormonal control of implantation and early embryonic development. The sperm has to travel through the uterus and into the fallopian tubes. There, they will meet the egg, but must still penetrate a layer of loosely connected granulosa cells called the corona radiata. Once this barrier has been crossed, the sperm must then still get through the zona pellucidea, a tough protective layer of glycoprotein. The first sperm to meet the membrane of the oocyte will bind to sperm receptors and begin fusing the two membranes. This fusion causes the oocyte to release membrane-bound cortical granules to the outside of the cell. These granules will alter the membrane and zona pellucida to prevent polyspermy. At the same time, the sperm's nucleus is injected into the oocyte, where it patiently waits in the cytoplasm while the egg finishes its second round of meiosis. Like the first meiotic division, the second is also asymmetrical and results in a second polar body, which is ejected. The nucleus of the sperm will now fuse with the egg's nucleus, leading to a zygote. The zygote will then begin mitosis while traveling to the uterus. This travel time takes 4 to 5 days, but by the time the embryo reaches the uterus, it is a hollow ball of about 100 cells known as a blastocyst. The blastocyst will secrete enzymes which enable it to invade the endometrium, and as it does so, endometrial cells will surround and engulf the blastocyst. The blastocyst will continue to divide. Some cells will form finger-like projections known as chorionic villi. These projections will later become the placenta, but during the implantation process, penetrate into the vasculature of the endometrium. Enzymes from the villi will break down the maternal blood vessels until the villi become bathed in maternal blood. The embryonic blood will not intermingle with the maternal blood, but the proximity of the two blood supplies allow for diffusion of nutrients, gases, and wastes across the exchanged surfaces of the villi. Other substances, like maternal antibodies, must be transported across the membrane. During the second week of pregnancy, after implantation occurs, the cells of the embryo will begin to organize into layers. The inner cell mass will develop into an embryo and 3 additional layers: the amnion, allantosis, and the yolk sac. The amnion will secrete amniotic fluid to support and protect the fetus. The allantosis will form part of the umbilical cord, and the yolk sac will initially supply blood circulation and nutrition for the embryo. After about 4 weeks, the placenta will take over this function and the yolk sac will degenerate. Gastrulation will occur after about 3 weeks. This process transitions the developing embryo into 3 germ layers: the endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm. The endoderm will form the epithelial linings of the lungs, digestive tract, as well as the liver and the pancreas. The mesoderm will become the musculoskeletal system, blood vessels, heart, and kidneys, while the ectoderm will form the central and peripheral nervous systems. Lastly, organogenesis will take place. This is the process of forming the major organs, which takes place between the 3rd and 8th weeks of pregnancy. Hormones involved are initially controlled by the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary. The hypothalamus will secrete gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which travels to the anterior pituitary and stimulates secretion of luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone. Initially, these hormones will stimulate the maturation of tertiary follicles and the production of steroid hormones. Secondly, the corpus luteum is involved. The corpus luteum is created after the egg ruptures from the follicle. The thecal cells left behind will fill in the antral space, accumulate lipids and glycogen granules, and begin to secrete the hormones estrogen and progesterone, as well as inhibin. Progesterone is the dominant hormone, but the combination of estrogen and progesterone exert negative feedback control on the hypothalamus and thus the anterior pituitary. Inhibin, which is also secreted by the corpus luteum, further suppresses gonadotropin secretion. Lastly, the placenta is involved. The placenta, once it develops, will take over hormonal control for the developing fetus and secrete human chorionic gonadotropin, human chorionic somatomammotropin, estrogen, and progesterone. Progesterone, which is shown in this picture here, will prepare the endometrium for implantation. In the presence of progesterone, the lining will continue to thicken and change into a secretory structure. The endometrial cells will store lipids and glycogen in their cytoplasm to nourish the embryo until the placenta can form. At the same time, the glands of the endometrium will coil and blood vessels will grow into the connective tissue layer. The cervical mucus will also thicken in the presence of progesterone. This helps to prevent bacteria from entering the uterus. Lastly, progesterone will continue to suppress gonadotropin-releasing hormone, so the anterior pituitary won't secrete LH and FSH, which will then start a cycle over again. Human chorionic gonadotropin, which is also known as HCG, is secreted by the developing placenta and chorionic villi. This hormone is structurally similar to LH and will bind to LH receptors, signaling to the corpus luteum to remain intact and continue to produce progesterone, which will keep the endometrial lining intact. HCG will peak at about 3 months and diminish because the placenta has fully formed and takes over the secretion of progesterone, so the corpus luteum is no longer needed. Lastly, HCG will stimulate testosterone production in developing male embryos. Human chorionic somatomamotropin is structurally similar to growth hormone and prolactin. HCS will alter maternal glucose and fatty acid metabolism to better support fetal health and growth. It acts as an antagonist to insulin and increases circulation of free fatty acids. Estrogen, which is shown down here, is very structurally similar to progesterone and works in conjunction with progesterone. Consistently high levels of estrogen as well as progesterone will continue to act as negative feedback to the hypothalamus and GnRH. This helps LH and FSH to not be secreted and new follicles will not be developed. Estrogen will also contribute to the development of milk-secreting ducts in the breast, which become important after pregnancy. Estrogen, which is shown in this picture, is very similar to progesterone. Fertilization and implantation is a complex process involving many hormones being secreted by different organs. A woman has to grow not only new life, but also another organ, the placenta, while suppressing the body's natural menstrual cycle. The system is complex and many things can go wrong. Fluctuations in hormones are what cause many of the typical pregnancy symptoms, from nausea, mood swings, to fatigue and soreness. Without hormones, though, new life would not be created or sustained.